Hey there guys, I'm Will and welcome to the Comedy Review, the show that has a brighter future than most of this year's rookies. It's also the show where we talk about things that happen in motorsport. Things like this. Carlos Sainz commits assault, Alex Albon gets called a wanker, and Red Bull turn on Yuki Tsunoda already. We've got a shit ton to talk about this week, quite literally in fact, but we start here. After the Japanese Grand Prix committed genocide by boredom, it wasn't the most encouraging sight to check the F1 calendar and find out its next stop took the sport back to the Bahrain desert. The Sakhir International Circuit is rarely known for producing thrillers, and with McLaren showing dominant pace back in pre-season testing, expectations are about as high as the woman who hosts the Mercedes post-race debriefs nowadays. That was at least good news for championship leader Lando Norris, who, having had said lead reduced to basically nothing in Suzuka, could come into this weekend on more of a positive note.
Do you reckon you can kind of fend off the Red Bulls here, based on what you see?
Unlikely, just from my feelings at the minute.
Okay, apparently not then. Now we've got to talk about the FIA next, so just in case they are watching, f*** off, you f***ing shitty c***s. Good, that should have scared them off. Carlos Sainz was in the doghouse before the Japanese Grand Prix had even got underway, the Spaniard encountering what have officially been recognised as stomach problems ahead of lights out, and opting to be a few seconds late to the national anthem to avoid firing projectile excrement at his fellow drivers on live television. Not good enough, however, was a line from the FIA, who handed Sainz a $20,000 fine for the misdemeanour. I mean, how dare you go to the toilet rather than listening to a country's theme tune? In their defence, Ben Slime is pretty unfazed by shit these days, given how much tends to come out of his mouth. Carlos wasn't making life any easier for himself come Bahrain, reflecting on the ordeal as, quite bluntly, shit happens. Now he's being investigated again under the FIA's new anti-potty mouth policy. This, of course, comes in the same week that FIA Deputy President Robert Reid became the next name to yeet themselves overboard in what was quickly developing to be the FIA's very own 9/11 level implosion, with more bodies hitting the ground than the conspiracy theorist's wet dream. Finally in the news, let's talk reserve drivers. You may well remember Alpine running Japanese fossil Ryo Hirakawa in FP1 last week. Well, as it turns out, he doesn't want to be associated with the French anymore and has changed his colours to those of the Haas for the rest of the year, or however long it takes him to get bored of them too. The Japanese seems to think this poised a better opportunity to get on the grid, whether that's to do with the Toyota links or the fact that Alpine are already prepping Colapinto for later in the year, who knows. But in case you didn't think the French marquis had it out for poor old Jack Doohan, they decided to kick the Aussie out of practice on a circuit he didn't know, and for a guy who's f***ing off to one of their main rivals in just a matter of days. I genuinely think I'd rather be in an ISIS prison camp than Doohan's shoes right now. While on the subject of reserve drivers, they appeared to invade the paddock when FP1 rolled around. Hirakawa was busy testing his new temporary home at Haas and would be joined by Logan Sargent from Wish, Red Bull Cannon Fodder issue 4016, the Stroll's Dungeon Slave, an ex-Toto Wolff wank rag, and Ferrari's Dino Beganovic, who I've spent 10 minutes trying to think of a nickname for, and quite frankly I can't be bothered anymore. This is usually a chance for some of the new boys to demonstrate why they deserve a spot on the grid in place of the team's incumbent drivers. Well, Alex Albon always thinks 2 steps ahead, and so tried to kill Williams reserve Luke Browning midway through the session. Albon was a grumpy boy in Japan last week, constantly complaining over the radio Lewis Hamilton style, the only difference being people like Lewis Hamilton. A similar demeanour was on show in FP1, Alex moaning that he didn't know what brakes did. I mean, they stopped the car, you f***ing idiot. Elsewhere, Mercedes stand-in Frederick Vesti revealed he'd been driving the simulator with assists on, and Yuki Tsunoda was already wishing he was back with Racing Bulls when he missed his pit box. That wasn't the Japanese driver's only foul in the pit lane during opening practice, as he saw an opportunity to make his first ever Red Bull overtake on a slow-moving Alex Albon, in doing so almost sending several Sauber mechanics to the 2026 Paralympic Games. Also, this somehow got a smaller fine than Gate, which I still just don't understand. There were no surprises at the top, however. McLaren continuing their standard run plan of setting the fastest time while also allocating part of the session to let Lando practice how to f*** up a qualifying lap. I think I used that joke last week, but it works even better this time, so I'm leaving it in. Piastri will be the one to take the spoils in FP2, with Lando coming home a close second despite some discomfort in the cockpit. Norris was forced to request a change of helmet and for the headrest to be cleaned. A bit of a strange one until he realised Carlos must have been having stomach problems again. He wasn't the only one running into problems, as Antonelli seemed to have issues at the rear end of his car, the Mercedes team attempting to solve the problem by f***ing it. Another bit for the news segment now was Aston Martin announced that disgraced technical chief Dan Fallows would be leaving the organisation. Sorry, disgrace makes it sound like he touched kids or something. He just drove the team into the ground. Anyway, we all like to play pranks when we leave a workplace. It's not like HR can fire you or anything, so here's a harmless one on Fernando Alonso where his steering wheel falls off at 100 miles per hour. There were struggles down at Haas as well, Ollie Behrman claiming the final bend was making him, quote, very confused, adding further speculation to rumours about the Briton's sexuality. While that corner was turning the drivers gay, turn 10 was doing its more traditional job of turning them around, Russell seemingly attempting one of Bahrain's alternative track layouts in FP2 before practicing some celebratory donuts on Saturday morning. Speaking of that final practice session, we should touch on Nico Hülkenberg, celebrating 15 years in Formula 1 this weekend, only his kick Sauber seemed more keen on honouring the periods where the German was forced to sit on the sidelines. It was still the McLarens out front though, Piastri putting in a frightening lap towards the end to go 6/10 faster than Norris in second. Gasly was an encouraging 6th for Alpine, while Yuki Tsunoda was somehow slower than the stationary Hülkenberg. This is going to be fun come qualifying, isn't it? Max Verstappen also looked to be having problems come Q1, evident by a lock-up at the final turn, and the fact that teammate Tsunoda was now looking at least relatively competent. There was then a potential track limits breach on his final lap, though this mysteriously disappeared, which I'm sure will please Team LH and Lando fans indefinitely. The Dutchman did enough to get through then, as did Tsunoda in the second Red Bull. Slowson wasn't so lucky, the Kiwi out, and having to watch as Nico Hülkenberg track extended his Sauber into the second session. Apparently, this was only picked up on during Q3, meaning poor old Alex Albon, who should have finished 15th here, was eliminated for no reason whatsoever. The Q1 drop zone was completed by Lance Stroll and Ollie Behrman, both drivers fighting to show off their best Michael Schumacher impressions in 2025. You can play along with their game at home too. I'm guessing these were meant to be the post-skiing accident ones. At least Ocon was through in the other Haas, the Frenchman wanting to honour his team's 10-year history this weekend by recreating one of their most iconic moments when Q2 rolled around. Which means it's time for this again. Mercedes had let their head of track stuff man go to a wedding this weekend, and his replacements thought they'd pulled a blinder by getting Russell and Antonelli to the front of the pit lane as we waited for the track to go back to green. As it turns out, they just got the one-place grid drops instead. One of the bigger shocks of Q1 though was Jack Doohan finally realising how to be a Formula 1 driver and finishing in the top 10. Rumour has it Alpine's upgrade for this weekend involves installing Franco Colapinto in the nose cone with a pair of safety scissors trying right on the Aussie's cock. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough to save his genitalia come Q2, and Doohan was promptly circumcised as he came home P11. That takes us to the top 10 shootout then, Piastri continuing his strong practice form, topping the early runs from Russell and Norris. The track was evolving quickly, however, and soon it was Antonelli on provisional pole. Russell then made it Mercedes 1-2, putting the papaya cars under pressure, which means Lando Norris is probably f***ed, isn't he? Sure enough, while Piastri was still able to deliver the goods and take pole for the 2025 Bahrain Grand Prix, we can add one more to the bottle counter as Norris couldn't even make it through the first sector before making an error. That left the Briton down in 6th, behind one of the croissants, just in case you thought he hadn't suffered enough. On the bright side, he was at least ahead of both Red Bulls, who were down in 7th and 10th for Verstappen and Tsunoda respectively. To be fair, Norris didn't look like he was seeing the bright sides, more like he wanted to get behind one of his McLaren's other wheels as it ran him over. With the Mercs picking up those one-place grid drops, that saw Gasly promoted to the second row, and shout out to Carlos Sainz for getting his Williams into the top 8, and thus giving us some hope of overtakes in Sunday's Grand Prix. Before that though, don't think I've forgotten about our ex-Bell end of the week. So there's this show on children's TV right now called Mr. Tumble and Friends, a much more politically correct name. Back when I was growing up, it was genuinely called Something Special. Anyway, point is, I think it's time for that to make a comeback when you take a look at F1 Twitter this week. I've tried really hard to find a submission this time that doesn't involve any McLaren fans. Anyway, I gave up, so here we go. 3 Grand Prix, 3 winners. Nothing wrong so far. If you want close competition in F1, give Norris the fastest F1 car ever built. You know what, I don't actually think I disagree with that. Well, apart from the fastest F1 car ever built bit, but the message is pretty accurate, so this may well be the first time the person nominating Ex-Bell End of the Week becomes Ex-Bell End of the Week themselves. We could stop there, but having glanced at some of the rest of the comments, there were a few that couldn't just be left out. Piastri literally has the same. I'm not quite sure this person gets the message from the original tweet. He has that right now. Again, the stroke is strong with this one. Not necessarily he can do it in a slower car. 2021 would prove otherwise. Just a few people's noses got any more out of joint, they would be around the back of your heads. Yeah, this guy's got the right idea. I wonder if that's why the dude stepped down from the FIA. Clearly both the McLaren and Red Bull rear wing passed testing, but one flexes a whole lot more than the other. Sounds like someone wasn't transparent about something. Manufactured championship for more $sign. I would make a comment here, but having read that, I think I've genuinely lost so many brain cells I'd now qualify for the starring role in the original Something Special. If you'd like to nominate the next Ex-Bell End of the Week, and props if you can find one that's not McLaren related this time, use the hashtag on screen, tag me on the platform, or join our Discord server. Now, let's get to the Bahrain Grand Prix. Oh look, Zach Brown. I had to pinch myself off the start as the McLaren in pole actually got off the line well, and then I remembered it wasn't Lando Norris. The 4 car though wasn't slacking either, going from P6 to P3 in the first sector alone. This was unheard of, impossible even. Oh, never mind, he's just jumped the start. So with a 5-second penalty hanging over the Briton then, he needed to get ahead of Russell in second. The good news was that Lando claimed he had tons of pace. The bad news was that this was Lando Norris, so we got to spend 2 laps in the Mercedes dirty air doing very little with it before being forced into the pits to serve said penalty. Just down the road, it was getting personal between Sainz and Hamilton, the Spaniard valiantly defending against his old team, eventually having to relinquish the place at turn 11, after which he decided he was done for the day and dropped like a cow off a tower block. Sainz, of course, didn't have to go to Williams. In another world, he could be sat in that Red Bull for this season. Only they weren't enjoying things either, their fancy pit stop lights going on strike and costing both Max and Yuki in the opening stages. Almost everyone had pitted at this point, well, apart from Ferrari, who were just busy doing Ferrari things. Leclerc had already realised the team had fallen off their f***ometer and tried begging to go on the one-stop, if only to see his special ed department on the pit wall one less time. That was rejected as the Scuderia showed off a double stack, which was so bad it promoted Jack Doohan into the points. Things weren't going much better in the Verstappen camp, who was stuck behind the house of Esteban Ocon. Kimi Antonelli thought he could help with this, passing the Dutchman, which for some reason didn't make him very happy, though not quite as displeased as when Hamilton went by a few laps later. Kimi was loving these switchback moves though, a fact that was making the new Mercedes fan club rather happy indeed. I was slacking off Ferrari's strategy earlier, although now I'm thinking of taking that back, because Leclerc was closing in on Norris for third. His first attempt would have worked if turn 1 just hadn't existed, though Charles was able to learn from that experience and 1 lap later got the job done. Take 2 for Max Verstappen in the pits, and take 2 for Red Bull to find new ways of f***ing that up. The Dutchman's front right got a bit too attached in the middle stint and was adamant on finishing the race this time. Meanwhile, over at Williams, Sainz was making a move on the other Red Bull of Tsunoda for 6th. This one was described as smooth, according to the Williams PR team at least. I'm not quite sure that's the description I give, watching their car shed bodywork down the back straight like a rubbish Magic Mike impersonation. That brought out the safety car, the perfect situation for McLaren, as Piastri could now easily box from the lead, and Norris was able to get back in sync tyre life-wise with the cars around him. While all that was going on, Mercedes were pulling off their best Ferrari impression by throwing George on the softs and expecting him to go 24 laps. Ferrari were busy doing their own Ferrari impression, putting both cars on hards, the tyre universally hated by anyone so far, so I hope that doesn't age badly whatsoever. We'd go back to green then, with Piastri managing the restart well, while Norris made up for the actual start by losing a position to Hamilton, the Ferrari swooping around the outside into turn 1. This battle wasn't quite over yet though, as Norris thought he could do that too, only he couldn't as he repassed Hamilton in a different Bahraini state and was forced to give the position back. By the time Norris was ahead once again, the leaders were well up the road. I'd tell you how far up the road, but George Russell's transponder had an epileptic fit and had broken the entire timing screen. Once that had been turned off and on again, Norris was on the rear of Leclerc's Ferrari and tried to salvage a podium from his now crate of bottles on this Sunday afternoon. Only there was room for one more as he locked up into turn 1. The stewards had also been deployed at this stage, Lawson getting a penalty for minor contact with Hülkenberg, although it was perfectly allowable to crash into Lance Stroll apparently. Things were also getting worse for Carlos Sainz, who was handed a 10-second penalty for forcing Antonelli off the road, Williams at this point turning off the Spaniard's life support and bringing him in to retire. Lap 52 now, when Lando Norris finally makes it past the Ferrari of Leclerc, his sights now turning to George Russell in second, the Mercedes man suffering from control system issues, his steering wheel having a mind of its own, and deciding to open the DRS whenever Russell hits the radio button. Issues were compounding a lot of the field. Leclerc had no DRS either, and Russell being practically invisible was causing havoc for those around him. Meanwhile, in the confusing land of FIA penalties, they'd changed their mind on the whole Lawson-Stroll incident, and it was now a 10-second penalty for the RB driver. Piastri had managed this race to perfection, however, coming across the line to take his second win of the season, as Russell somehow held on to P2, though is still under investigation at time of recording for his DRS infringement from earlier. Can't wait for that to turn into a penalty and for you all to castrate me in the comments down below. But that was a cracking race, plenty of overtaking from start to finish, and with that in mind, I'm going to slap this one with a solid 8 out of 10. Shoutouts this week have to go to Haas, Ocon coming home in P8, while Behrman swapped his 2013 Schumacher impression for something more akin to 2003, as he went from the back to 10th. Props to Tsunoda for being the second Red Bull driver to score a point since COTA 2024, and yes, I promise you that stat is real. Baguette Man, who despite losing 6th to Verstappen on the final lap, took home a good points haul for Alpine, and I guess I should also apologise once again to Ferrari, whose strategy did eventually give them a strong 4-5 finish for the team. Let me know what you thought of the race down in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the comedy review, then you can drop the video a like and get subscribed for more of them throughout the rest of 2025. Big thank you to the members and patrons as well, who get the early previews and now exclusive videos these days. We've got some IndyCar action tonight, so expect a video on that tomorrow, and I've got a new Talk Shift episode out as well. Link to that channel as well as to all the Patreon stuff is in the description below, and I'll leave you with a clip from that podcast to whet your appetite a bit. Perez is signed for Cadillac.
Oh, has he?
Yeah. I haven't seen this anywhere, right? Apart from this one incredibly trustful source. Trustful, that's a good word. Trustful source,
Cadillac F1 director reveals details of signed contract with Sergio Perez.
Signed contract. It's a done deal.
Wow.
Look at the images. Look at the images. They are clearly, I mean, shadow of a doubt. There he is in a Cadillac top and everything.
Isn't that top left one quite clearly one from Force India?
Maybe, because
that very much looks like that looks like Perez in Force India.
well, he's smiling, so it's not from the Red Bull days.
That's for sure.
Have a good one, everybody. No, hang on a minute. F*** off.